case that shook Hong Kong to its core in the early 1980s. A case so horrifying it left an indelible mark on the city's psyche. Meet the Rainy Night Butcher, a criminal whose chilling acts of violence were so grotesque that they led to drastic measures to shield those involved in the investigation from the psychological trauma of his brutality. So, who exactly was this monster, and just how horrific were his crimes? Buckle up as we unravel the details of this nightmarish story. But before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on any of our gripping content. Our tale begins in the vibrant and bustling Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, a city renowned for its stunning mix of traditional and modern charm. From its breathtaking natural beauty to its iconic skyline, Hong Kong is a place where East meets West in a spectacular display of culture and architecture. Tourists flock to see the grand structures like Disneyland and the Big Buddha. But behind this glossy facade, something far more sinister was unfolding. On a seemingly ordinary Friday, February 12, 1982, the tranquility of the Jingmin riverbank in the Shatin district was shattered. A sanitation worker going about his routine task of cleaning up trash from the river made a discovery that would haunt him forever. As he approached the Liuyan Bridge, he spotted something floating in the water. Drawn by curiosity, he retrieved the object, only to find that it was a decomposing human head. The discovery was both shocking and grotesque. The head was in such a state of decay that its face was barely recognizable. It had curly hair, recently permed, and was adorned with gold hoop earrings, details that pointed to the victim being a woman. Inside the mouth were 3 false teeth, further adding to the horror of the scene.
200 yards from where the head is found in the water, police find a pair of human legs in a yellow plastic packet.
The police arrived swiftly, but were met with a sight so rare and disturbing that it left even seasoned officers shaken. Further investigation led the police to a yellow plastic bag about 200 meters from the initial find. Over the next 4 days, their search expanded to the nearby canals, where they uncovered more body parts, the upper torso and 1 arm. On this arm was a distinctive tattoo, a sword piercing through a heart, with a bird perched next to it. Tattoos were uncommon among women at that time, giving the police a crucial clue. In a bid to identify the victim, the police made the tattoo a central piece of their public appeal. Their efforts quickly paid off when a middle-aged man and a young man came forward, claiming to be the victim's father and husband. The father, with a heavy heart, identified the victim as his daughter, Chan Fung Lan. She was 22 years old and worked at a nightclub. He noted that she had recently replaced her teeth due to dissatisfaction with her appearance, and that the tattoo matched the one on her arm.
警察揾到佢嘅身份之後，就曾經就調查佢屋企嘅背景。咁其實當時發現佢同佢嗰個先生，佢嘅丈夫啦，個感情係有啲問題嘅。咁但係經過調查之後咧，發覺佢老公嘅嗰個犯案嘅嗰個即係個機會咧好微，因為佢老公咧都提出咗佢嘅不在場證據。
Chan Fung Lan's murder was just the beginning of a spree of terror that had plagued Hong Kong. The Rainy Night Butcher was not just any criminal. His methods were perverse and calculated. His brutality was so extreme that female police officers and forensic staff were barred from the investigation and trial, a measure taken to protect them from the severe mental distress his crimes could cause. The Rainy Night Butcher was a name given to the perpetrator because of his habit of committing his heinous acts on rainy nights, which created an atmosphere of fear and panic among the public. His cruelty and the meticulous nature of his crimes were unlike anything Hong Kong had seen before. This case left a scar on the community and led to significant changes in how investigations of such nature were handled. The Rainy Night Butcher's reign of terror was a grim reminder of the depths of human depravity, and it served as a stark warning of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most picturesque places. She was a bar worker who had a seemingly normal life, married with 2 daughters. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. Her marriage was on the rocks, a detail that becomes crucial as our story unfolds. Fung Lan's husband had some serious issues with her, especially concerning her interactions with a man known only as Four Eyes. So, who is this mysterious Four Eyes? He was a local figure with a questionable reputation who, apparently, had his sights set on Fung Lan. He was actively trying to persuade her to leave her husband and run away with him. When Fung Lan's husband caught wind of this, he stormed into the bar where Four Eyes was known to hang out, leading to a heated confrontation. Could this have been the motive for something darker? The police certainly thought so at first. However, as investigations unfolded, the husband was quickly ruled out as a suspect. He had a rock-solid alibi. This left Four Eyes in the spotlight, but despite the initial suspicion, the police couldn't dig up any concrete evidence against him. It was a dead end. The plot thickens. It turns out that Chan Fung Lan had previously worked at another bar and had borrowed $500 from there. But, surprise, surprise, this lead also fizzled out with no new information. With no viable suspects and no solid leads, the police were left scratching their heads. The next clue took them to a taxi stand on Kimberley Road, the last place Fung Lan was seen before her disappearance. On the night of February 3rd, Fung Lan had been drinking heavily, and her colleagues helped her call a cab. They watched her get in, but after that, she vanished. Her husband confirmed she never made it home that night. In a city with thousands of taxis, finding the one that picked her up was like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
咁我哋其中一個調查嘅方向咧，係亦都揾全香港嘅的士司機睇下有冇喺佢失蹤當晚咧接載呢個死者。但係咧，目擊證人咧係未能夠提供呢個的士嘅車牌俾我。
And the situation grew even more disturbing when, in the months following her disappearance, there was a surge of women going missing in the same area. The eerie pattern: every disappearance occurred on rainy nights. The community was gripped by panic and fear. One particularly unnerving incident involved a woman who, scared by the news reports, thought of Chan Fung Lan's case as she took a cab one night. Can you imagine the terror? The fear was palpable, and it was spreading fast. Then, out of the blue, a breakthrough came. In mid-August, the police received a tip from a photo shop employee. He had stumbled upon something disturbing: images of what looked like human body parts. These weren't ordinary photos. According to the employee, the photos had been brought in by a customer whose equipment had malfunctioned. This customer was a photographer for a morgue, responsible for documenting human remains. The employee usually handled such photos personally, but this time another staff member processed them. The discovery of these photos was crucial. The forensic team analyzed them and determined the body parts had been dismembered recently, no more than 3 hours before the photos were taken. This ruled out the possibility that they were medical teaching materials, as those would typically be preserved and properly handled. What really stood out was the state of the body parts. They showed no signs of rigor mortis and were separated in a crude manner, suggesting a lack of surgical skill and professional tools.
Showing bodies or part of a body which had been cut open, but not in a way that any of us recognize as a surgical cut. The usual things you expect with operations, the green tablecloth, the surgical lights and the gloved hands, etc. So this was unusual.
This detail was chilling. The dissection wasn't done with medical precision, indicating a more brutal, personal touch. Investigators were analyzing some eerie photographs that had been brought to a local photo shop. Among these images, they found something deeply disturbing: a small drop of water in the upper right corner of one photo. When they zoomed in, they could make out half of a girl's face, and she looked strikingly similar to a 17-year-old girl named Liang Wom, who had been reported missing a month prior. This revelation was like a jolt of lightning for the investigation. Liang Wom's face in the photo turned the customer who brought in these pictures into a prime suspect. But here's the catch. While the Photoshop employees remembered this customer, their descriptions were vague at best. They didn't know his name, address, or anything concrete about him. The police had to act fast and smart. They decided to set up an elaborate sting operation to catch the suspect when he came to retrieve his photos. Undercover officers blended into the scene as store employees, customers, and even street vendors to keep a close eye on every activity around the photo shop. They also mixed in some random photos with the suspects to avoid tipping him off. The big moment came on August 17th at around 6:15 p.m. A taxi pulled up in front of the photo shop and out stepped a young man around 20 years old. The officers were ready. As he picked up his photos, they moved in and arrested him on the spot. He claimed he was there to support a friend working at a newspaper. The police decided to accompany him to this supposed friend's place. But surprise, surprise, there was no friend. This ruse led to his immediate detention, and his vehicle was seized for inspection. And here's where it gets even darker. Inside the suspect's taxi, the police found a pair of handcuffs on the windshield and a knife in the trunk. They also discovered electrical wires and what appeared to be torn fabric, suspected to be from a victim.
當時咧係 check 到部的士先，咁喺嗰部的士嗰個擋風玻璃度咧就揾到一個手球同把刀。
The evidence was mounting. The suspect, identified as Lam Kor-wan, was a 27-year-old night shift taxi driver living in Kwantung with his half-siblings. But there's more to his story than just this disturbing discovery. Lam Kor-wan, born Lam Kwok on May 22, 1955 in Malaysia, had a troubled childhood. His father, Lam, had 3 wives and 10 children, and Lam was the eldest son of his father's first wife. His early life was marred by severe physical abuse and witnessing his mother's suffering. This constant trauma left deep psychological scars, making him a withdrawn and quiet individual. When Lam's family moved to Hong Kong, the domestic violence ceased, but life didn't become easy. He struggled with loneliness and isolation. As a teenager, his only solace was an electronic chess set. As an adult, Lam chose to work night shifts as a taxi driver, a time he found most peaceful. In the late 1970s, Lam developed a disturbing hobby, collecting adult magazines which he ordered discreetly from England. He was too embarrassed to buy them openly, so he kept his stash hidden in a locked chest, away from prying eyes. But beneath this facade lay a disturbing obsession. Unbeknownst to those around him, Lam had a secret hobby that was anything but harmless. Every day, he would take out adult magazines, admiring the images with an unhealthy fixation. He even went so far as to use a camera to capture these nude images, feeding his perverse desires. But Lam's fixation didn't stop there. It escalated. In a shocking turn, he bought an instant camera and began sneaking into women's restrooms to take covert photographs. This perverse game of his didn't last long. In 1973, Lam took things even further. He threatened a young girl with a knife near a public restroom, clearly intent on committing a heinous act. The authorities were called, and Lam was swiftly arrested. However, the legal system failed to hold him accountable. A psychological evaluation deemed Lam mentally ill, and instead of facing punishment, he was ordered to Castle Peak Hospital for treatment. After 102 days of psychological care, Lam was released back into society. It was a shocking outcome that left many wondering how he would re-enter the world. After his release, Lam changed his name and began a new chapter as a night shift taxi driver, adopting a new identity. From 1981 onward, he developed a new obsession: photography. He taught himself the craft, joining photography groups and immersing himself in this hobby. On the surface, it seemed like a harmless interest, but it was far from it. When questioned by the police, Lam displayed a calm demeanor and an unsettling ability to predict their questions. His cool, collected responses only added to the eerie vibe surrounding him. The investigators discovered something chilling when they searched his residence: a hidden treasure trove of professional photography equipment. Lam had nearly turned his small room into a makeshift studio. Here's where it gets even darker. Lam's room was adjacent to his father's room, and his sister's room was across the hall. His own room, right at the entrance, was packed with disturbing finds. The police had already identified Lam's bedroom as a location in the photos they had seen from the Photoshop. They opened a large chest hidden under his bunk bed and were met with a horrifying discovery.
The actual area of the flat was itself quite small, probably 400, 500 square feet. And within that area, quite typical for Hong Kong at the time, you had a whole family living within that small flat. Lam's room was directly opposite the entrance door, and that room in particular was indeed much smaller, probably 10 feet by about 5 to 6 feet wide, very small indeed.
Inside the chest, they found a collection of sensitive photos, anatomy textbooks, and countless images of female body parts. Alongside these were 40 videotapes, a red handbag, a pair of white shoes, and surgical instruments. Among the photos, they even found an image with a heart tattoo, something eerily familiar. It became clear that Lam Kor-wan's obsession was not just a personal kink, but a serious criminal behavior. The shocking nature of these findings pointed to a case far more serious than initially imagined. Lam's carefully hidden world of obsession, violence, and perversion was now laid bare. The images and items uncovered in his room revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior that extended well beyond his initial offenses. The police were in for the shock of their lives when they searched Lam Kor-wan's home. They found a room that seemed almost like a nightmarish horror film set. Open plastic containers emitted a terrible stench, and what they discovered inside was absolutely horrifying. The containers held women's private body parts. The walls were marked with blood stains and strands of hair, painting a gruesome picture of what had transpired. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. It took the authorities 4 full days to meticulously comb through Lam Kor-wan's residence. During this intense investigation, Lam's parents and younger brother were also taken into custody. Despite the mountains of evidence stacked against him, Lam continued to deny any wrongdoing. His unyielding denials only added to the horror of the situation. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted to Lam's family. Astonishingly, despite living under the same roof, Lam's parents and younger brother had been completely oblivious to his ghastly activities. Upon discovering the horrific traces of Lam's crimes, they were understandably horrified and terrified. Lam's younger brother described his siblings' behavior as mysterious and strange, noting that Lam was extremely protective of his belongings, reacting with anger if anyone dared to touch them. With the clock ticking and the need to expedite the investigation, the police turned their attention to the videotapes found in Lam's home. While most of the tapes proved to be unrelated to the murder cases, 3 stood out. These tapes were horrifying self-recordings by Lam himself, titled A Serious Secret Operation, Rainy Night, and Fourth Action. The content was so disturbing that it caused some officers to vomit on the spot. The graphic nature of these videos was overwhelming, leading the police to exclude all female officers and forensic experts from the investigation and trial to avoid further psychological trauma. When Lam Kor-wan was brought in for questioning, he finally broke down. With his head bowed, he confessed to all his crimes, recounting the chilling details. Lam's first victim was Chan Fung Lan. He had picked her up in his taxi, and things quickly turned sinister. After a short drive, Chan began to panic. She screamed, demanded Lam stop the taxi, and even tried to escape by vomiting on the roadside. Lam, frustrated by her erratic behavior and constant changes of destination, drove her to a deserted area. There, in a cold and calculated move, he strangled her with an electrical wire, ending her life in the most brutal way imaginable. The investigation into Lam Kor-wan's horrific acts painted a picture of a man consumed by darkness and obsession. His daily life masked a world of nightmares, and the gruesome evidence uncovered revealed a deeply troubled individual whose actions left a trail of terror and tragedy. Lam's cruelty knew no bounds. After killing her, he began a grotesque process of dismemberment. He used a knife to cut off parts of the victim's body, focusing especially on sensitive areas. The dismembered body parts were then wrapped in newspaper, stuffed into a sack, and tossed into the trunk of a cab. Lam disposed of them on a slope at Tha Hang Road, continuing to document his atrocities in a video titled "A Serious Secret." The horror didn't stop there. Lam's third victim was a 29-year-old nightclub waitress named El San. She left work at 4 a.m. and once again took a taxi driven by Lam. Just like with his previous victims, Lam wasted no time. He recorded the entire dismemberment process on video, a sickening footage known as Operation Rainy Night. This time, Lam set up a camera on a bunk bed, using the selfie function to capture every gruesome detail of his actions. In one particularly disturbing scene, Lam even opened his victim's abdomen, removed her intestines, and in a bizarre display of depravity, licked them. Initially, he was curious about tasting human flesh, but found it repulsive and abandoned the idea. The dismembered body parts were discarded on Tha Hang Road, and Lam continued to exhibit no remorse. What's even more chilling is Lam Kor-wan's twisted justification for his crimes. He felt no remorse for his first three victims, all bar employees whom he dehumanized as useless to society. But his fourth victim was different, a 17-year-old student named Wai Su. Wai Su was on the brink of adulthood with a bright future ahead of her. She was a student at St. Francis College and had just attended a teacher appreciation event at the Sheraton Hong Kong Hotel. When she took a taxi that fateful night, little did she know that her life was about to be cut tragically short. Lam's choice of victims was disturbingly methodical, driven by his warped views and sickening desires. Each crime he committed was not only a physical horror, but also a psychological terror, a clear manifestation of his deep-seated issues and moral decay. This case underscores a grim reality about the depths of human depravity and the chilling lengths to which some will go to satisfy their darkest urges. Lam Kor-wan's actions are a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need for robust systems to protect and support those in vulnerable situations. As the night wore on, the victim grew tired and fell asleep. Seizing the opportunity, Lam used an electrical wire to strangle her. After her death, he took her body back to his apartment, where he continued his twisted ritual of filming and photographing his crimes. In a gruesome twist of fate, he accidentally knocked over a light, causing a burn on the victim's thigh. The horror didn't end there. The case went to trial on March 3, 1983, with Chief Prosecutor Faber presiding. In a bid to protect the public from the shock of the evidence, the courtroom scene was tightly controlled. Only the prosecution and defense lawyers, the judge and the jury, were allowed to see the disturbing video Lam had made. The grisly evidence also included the victim's internal organs, but they were kept out of the courtroom to avoid further trauma. In a dramatic courtroom twist, Lam admitted to manslaughter, but the prosecution was not having it. They were adamant that this was a clear-cut case of murder. The trial brought in 5 psychological experts. 3 argued that Lam wasn't mentally ill, but rather had a disturbing sexual preference for women. The remaining 2 experts believed he was mentally ill and had lost control. After 18 days, on April 8th, the final verdict came in. The jury decided Lam Kor-wan was completely sane and had committed the murder solely to satisfy his bizarre desires. He was convicted of murder in all 4 cases, and Judge Faber sentenced him to death. Both the father of victim Chan Fong-lan and Lam's own father accepted the sentence with no intention of appealing. Thanks for watching. Please like the video, press the subscribe button, and also drop your thoughts in the comments section.